now. So before we get into the IK handle tool, again, it's important that we make the distinction between FK and IK. And we've already seen this really with the rigs that we've been using for our run and jumps and walk cycles. But just to reiterate, again, FK is forward kinematics, and it's called this because you would move through your joint chain forward in its hierarchy to animate that hierarchy. So if I were to just simply create a joint chain here, to animate this, let's say it's a leg or something like that, I could start at the top of the leg and animate the upper leg and then the knee. And so we would move forward through this hierarchy in order to move these joints. Now, IK, or inverse kinematics, controls your joint system in an inverse fashion. So we can start at the bottom of your hierarchy and animate it all the way up to the top. So we would need the IK handle tool to create this effect. Again, the IK handle tool can either be retrieved here from the skeleton menu underneath Create IK Handle, or we can just simply select it here from the rigging shelf. And so when we click on this tool, now to create an IK handle, what you want to do is click first on the joint at the top of the hierarchy. So this one up here, I'll go ahead and click on that. And then we want to click on the last joint that I drew, or the joint at the bottom of the hierarchy second. So I'm going to click on that. And as soon as I do that, it's going to draw in a IK handle for me. Yeah. Oh, so if we look at what it's done here is it's connected the joint at the top of the hierarchy and the one at the bottom with this IK handle. And if we look at the bottom here, the handle is this kind of little L shape. And if we select that, we can grab it, and then with translation, we can move it. And again, it's going to move inversely up through the hierarchy. So we're starting at the bottom, and it's going to animate everything up inside the hierarchy. So we get this kind of stretchy effect. Let me undo that. Let's look at the different tool settings now for an IK handle. And real quick, I'm going to delete this IK handle. One really quick way to select an IK handle is just marquee drag over that bottom joint. And that IK handle should get precedence over your selection order. And with that selected, if I hit delete, it will remove that out of there. Let me undo that real quick. The IK handles are also here in the outliner. So it's going to have that icon for the IK handle, and it's going to be labeled IK handle 1, 2, and so forth. And if we grab that and delete it, we'll go back to just our normal joint chain. Now, I'm going to go back to the joint tool and double click on it here to bring up its tool settings. I'm going to hit the reset option here, so we go back to default, and I want to look at the solver types. So here it says current solver. We have two types. We have single chain and rotate plane solver. This just dictates what type of joint chain we're going to get for our IK solver. And so I'm going to grab this geometry real quick before I even create an IK handle, or not geometry, but joint chain. And I'm going to duplicate it and push it over. And then I'm going to go back to that IK handle tool. And I'm going to leave it at its default here, so rotate plane solver. And I'm going to go ahead and we'll do the first one as a rotate plane solver. And then I'm going to go back and change this over to single chain, and we'll make this one here a single chain solver. Now, initially they look pretty similar, but if I were to marquee drag and grab both handles, a couple things you'll notice here. So one, the handles themselves are oriented a little differently. So they're at different angles. So this one's kind of flat to the world space. This one is angled. And then if we look at the top here, so the one on the left actually has a rotate plane solver, and it's represented by this disc with a kind of a white triangle or arrow emanating from the center of that top joint. The other one does not have this. Now, the benefit of using a rotate plane solver is it gives us more control over where, I guess in this instance, our knee or elbow is pointed. It also dictates how these will flip and rotate. So if I were to, with both of these handles selected, drag them up in Y, they will both rotate, but they rotate sort of at different intervals. And if you notice here, once I get beyond a certain point, that plane solver will also flip with the joint chain here. So let me undo that. The other thing this allows us to do is if I grab this handle and go into the channel box, we should have these pole vector options, so pole vector X, Y, and Z. And if I play around with these, we should be able to flip that joint chain there for our rotate plane solver. Now with the other one, if I grab that handle for the single chain and play around with that pole vector settings, nothing happens. I don't get the ability to point that knee in any given direction. Another thing this allows us to do is we can rig this. So if I grab a locator node here, and I'm going to push it out to the side, I'm going to make another one and put it in front of the single chain solver. And then I'm going to grab that locator node. I'll shift select our rotate plane solver IK handle. And under constraints, I'm going to do a pole vector constraint. And you'll notice as soon as I click that, it connects or tethers that locator node the locator to my rotate plane solver. And then if I grab that node and move it, the knee will point wherever this is positioned. Now, if I try to do that with a single chain solver, so I'll grab that locator, I'll shift select the handle and go up to constrain, and then go to pole vector, I'm going to get an error. So if I click that, nothing happens. And then if I look down here in the dialog box where we get our warning, in red here it's saying error, handle must be valid and use rotate plane solver. So it's telling me what's wrong and why this did not work. And so we do not get that option with a single chain solver. So just keep that in mind. We will, as we're rigging, we're going to use a rotate plane solver. So let me take those and delete them. Let's go to the front view. We'll draw in another knee here. Something else I guess I should mention as we're looking at this. So let's pretend this is a knee. The way you draw your joints is really important, especially when we're doing IK handles. So I would almost never recommend drawing your joints that need to bend in a straight line. You want usually the bend to favor a little bit where the outside bend is going to happen. So in this case, I would put this joint here in the center. I would put it closer to the front of the knee where I want to favor that bend. So if I draw this straight down, let me do another joint here. And I'm going to draw these straight down instead of having a slight bend in that. And then let's come into the IK handle tool. I'm going to reset it. And I'm going to do two rotate plane solvers here on both of these. All right, so they each have their own IK handle. So if I grab this one, because I put in that bend, it's going to bend in that direction. So we can predict a little easier what direction that's going to bend in. So it's going to bend forward to the left. Now this other one, it's hard to dictate. We can't really tell what direction it's going to bend in until I start moving this IK handle up. So it might go in the correct direction, it might not, I don't really know. So let's pull this up and see what happens. And so it's not bending in the direction I would want it to. So if this were my knee and my knee is pointed to the left, this is obviously not pointing in the direction I would want it to go in. It's going to point, in this case, forwards towards the z-axis. So again, this becomes difficult to anticipate if you don't put in the bend in your joints as you draw them in. So just keep that in mind. Usually for your arms and knees, you want that center joint to favor that elbow or knee, whatever appendage we're drawing in. We don't want to draw in straight lines. So let me take that and delete those handles, and we delete this joint chain here. And then we'll go back into the tool here and take a look at its other settings. The only other settings we'll look at here is the snap enable and the sticky setting. So snap enable, what that does is it snaps the IK handle to your bottom joint as soon as we're done drawing. So let me put in two of these joint systems. Let me go back to the IK handle, and we'll do one with snap enable. And let's go back and do one with snap enable off. And then I'm going to grab both handles. And again, initially they look the same, but if I drag these down, you'll notice I can drag these handles down and away from that bottom joint. But as soon as I let go of left click, the one on the left snaps back to the initial joint, and the other one just stops and hangs wherever I dragged it to. So I could keep dragging this out and over and put it wherever I want, and it's going to stick or stay wherever I put it. So usually we don't want to do this. So usually by default we'll leave that stick enable on, or the snap enable, and it's going to put that back right to that joint. All right, let's undo that. Let's go back to the IK handle tool and reset it. The last thing we have here is sticky. And what the sticky does is it dictates how the root joint, or the joint at the top of the hierarchy, is going to behave when you translate it. So I'm going to do one without, so that's the default here. So let's go ahead and make this the one default without it. And then let's go back and turn that on and enable it for this one. And then again, initially it looks the same. Now the way we test this one out is we need to select the root joint at the top of the hierarchy. So I'm going to click on this one, and then I'll shift select the other one over here. And then watch the difference here as I translate this up and down in Y. So the one on the left has it disabled, and what it does is it moves the entire hierarchy. So everything follows with it at the same rate, and there's no change. Now the one on the right allows me to move the root independently from the other joints, and as I do this, what it does is it makes that IK handle down here stick to the ground, and then we get this kind of bending motion. Now, we won't use this when we set up our legs. We're actually going to use a series of constraints and group nodes that will allow us to essentially get the same effect. So this isn't something we would normally do. Let's see, what else do we got? That's really it for this menu. Let me hit the reset tool to get that back to default. Let me come over here and turn this into an IK joint system. Let me delete this, and then we're going to look at the attribute editor for the IK handle. So I'm going to grab that IK handle there. Let's go into the attribute editor. So just like the joints or the bones themselves, they have a transform attribute here where we could come in and adjust the translation, rotation, and scale. Basically all the same stuff we would get out of the channel box. We're not really going to look at that. Let's go ahead and collapse that. Skeleton info we don't want. So the IK handle attributes and the IK solver, these are things we might change. So let's take a look at the IK handle attributes first, and you'll notice right off the bat here you have snap enabled and stickiness. So these are the same settings we were getting out of the tool menu, and so these settings aren't permanent. We can always go into the attribute editor and change these at any time. So I could turn off that snap enable, and what that does is, again, it allows me to grab this handle and move it out, and it won't snap back to the joint. If we turn that back on, and then if we go to stickiness, again, we can turn sticky on, and then if I grab that top joint and move it, again, that handle will stick to the ground, and we can have that root move independently from the handle. Grab that again, and let's go turn sticky off. Let's see, what else do we have? The priority and weight we really won't mess with, so I'll leave that alone. Let's go ahead and collapse that and go to the IK solver menu. And so here at the top we have IK blend, and what this does is it allows us to blend between IK and FK. And so right now at a value of 1, we're 100% IK, and again, that's how we're able to get this to move inversely through the hierarchy as we animate the handle. Now, if we start to take this down, it will gradually remove influence until we get to 0. And once we get to 0, this leg is 100% FK at this point. So if I were to grab that IK handle and move it, nothing happens. And what this allows me to do now is I can come in and animate or rotate these joints in a forward fashion, so one joint at a time. Let me undo that and grab that handle. So I'm going to set this back up to 100 or 1 for 100% influence. This IK-FK control, this essentially does the same thing with a checkbox. Below that you have IK solver, and so if we click this, again, at any time we can change this from a single chain or a rotate plane solver if we want. And then below that you have the pole vector. So this is the same as what we were getting out of these attributes here in the channel box. So the pole vector X, Y, and Z. So if I grab that Z and rotate it, it'll do the same thing here in this menu. Let's see, let's undo that. That's really it here for the attributes. So that's pretty straightforward on the IK handle. The last thing I want to look at is the IK spline tool. And so it's essentially, or more or less, a similar tool to the IK tool, but it's for a joint system that's comprised of more than 3 joints. So as you've noticed, all the joint systems that I've been setting up so far with the IK handle tool have been comprised of only 3 joints. So let me go ahead and take this and delete it. And so this would be for those of you that might have a rig. Let's say you're setting up a rig that has a character with a tail. We could maybe rig this with a spline tool. I think in the other class, someone is actually doing an anglerfish that has that sort of light source that hangs in front of their character's or the fish's face, and we could maybe use this to rig that because it would be a more complex rig with more than 3 joints. So I'm going to draw in something that would maybe be a tail. So let's just create this series of joints here. And then let's go to the skeleton menu, and in here there's a create IK spline handle. Now I'm going to hold Control and Shift and left click on that to get a shortcut up here in my tab or my shelf system. And then the way we use this, it's actually the same as the IK handle tool. So we'll click on the spline tool first. And then down here, I want to click on the initial joint that I drew in, or the joint at the top of the hierarchy. So I'll click on that one first. And then I want to click on the last joint that I drew, so the tip of the tail there. I'll go ahead and click on that last. And then it looks like a pretty similar IK setup here. So you'll notice it's kind of tethered, the IK handle. So the top of the hierarchy is attached to the bottom of the hierarchy there. And then if we look there, there is an IK handle that I can select. But if I hit W and try to move it, you can't actually animate this using that handle. So I can't select it or move it from here. What I actually need to do is I need to animate the curve. So if you'll notice here, if we follow the joint chain itself, you'll notice there's now a blue curve here following that joint hierarchy. And if I click on it, I can select that curve. And then if I right click and go to Control Vertex, it's going to give me these control vertices. So some of them might be floating way out here, but they're these pink vertices. And if I select them, I can left click and drag, and I can maybe have my tail whip around like this using these vertices. Now, this isn't very animation friendly, or animator friendly rather, because I can't really key animation on these vertices, but 2, it would be really cumbersome to expect my animator to select the curve and then right click and then go to Control Vertex. So again, not very animation friendly. But what I could do is select that vertex point and then use a deform cluster. And so if I go under deform and hit cluster, it'll attach a cluster node to that vertice. And then if I deselect all of that and then just grab this cluster node, I could animate this cluster node. So if I grab that and move it around, it's easy to see, select, and again, animate. And so I could maybe do this for all of these vertex points. So I'm going to grab that curve again and go back to Control Vertex, and I can grab this one way out here, and we'll apply a cluster node to that. And I think there's one more out here on the tip. Now this one's really hard to select, so I might have to zoom in a little bit to grab it. And let's go here to deform and do another cluster. And so now we have these clusters that again are easier to grab and select and animate, so we can again animate our tail. Let's see, is there anything else? One other thing that might be good to know, and this is just in terms of selection priority, in most cases the bone or joints get precedence over everything else in your scene. So if you have, let's say, bones placed inside of geometry and you're trying to select the geometry, but no matter what, it wants to favor the bone system. One way to alleviate that is up at the top there are selection types. And if we click on this icon that looks like the bone tool, it'll deselect it and it'll be grayed out. And this will disable our ability to select joints. And so, you know, if I were to marquee drag over this or try to click on the joints, no matter what I do, it will not select them. So that'll be really handy when we've got our joints in place, but we want to select our geometry instead of the joints. Just toggling that off real quick will make it easier to select that geometry. I'm going to stop here. And so there's only about 8 minutes left here.